Thank you for teeing everything up, Carrie. I really appreciate it. And then Jonathan, it's so good to see you again. I'm glad you hit the mark on the caffeine.
Oh,
It's a sweet spot to be.
yeah, awesome to be here. I'm really excited about our conversation. The perfect caffeination is just a bonus, but
Fabulous. Fabulous. Well, I'd love to set the table a bit and just give folks an opportunity to get to know you. So if you want to let us know a bit more about who you are, what you do, something about Chime, I think that'd be great.
Sure. So I'm John Roman. I'm the Senior Director of Marketing Technology over at Chime. Really exciting role I took on here just because this was a role that did not exist before I joined. So I had the great opportunity to join coming formerly from electronic arts. And then I had a little bit of time at SiriusXM before this amazing opportunity came up that I couldn't say no to. So kind of building a new functional organization within marketing that just supports all of the data and technology use, across all marketing channels. So it's been fast and furious for the past few months, but we're starting to see the team come together and just kind of tackling some of those initiatives over at Chime that are allowing our marketers to, enter the next phase of the crawl, walk, run approach to different channel initiation with consumers. So that's kind of right now.
That's perfect. And we had such a beautiful conversation. I think it was 2 weeks ago, really coming together around how we wanted to craft this talk. And I think we each sit at a unique intersection. Just to introduce myself as well, my name's Devin Craig. I'm the head of product marketing for Quad, and Quad is a marketing experience agency. And what we're really looking to do is continue to innovate in the marketing space and bring an experience for our clients to help them drive success for their business, given all the different moving pieces we're seeing in the landscape today. Quad is a historically scrappy print startup that over the past 50 years has really evolved. And then I love where you're coming in from Chime, which is very much technology focused. To have that kind of juxtaposition coming together around what's innovative in marketing right now, I think is going to be really interesting. So I'm excited to be able to dig in with you there. So I know we talked about a few different things and we wanted to start with people. So I think people inherently are the heartbeat of any organization, and key to success. So I think I would love to hear, as you talked about your team and building and creating this space at Chime, how do you get incredible talent? How do you not only get them bought in, but how do you keep them?
Yeah, I say it has been instrumentally important to keep in touch with people that I've worked with over the years that have just been amazing, folk on my team, amazing leaders, amazing doers in organizations that really have a great technical capacity. So first things first, I'd say, always keep in contact with those folk that you've worked with that are just like great employees in general. You never know when there's going to be another opportunity that pops up where you may want to bring them into an organization or vice versa. They may want to bring you into an organization. And it helps clear some of the uncertainty of hiring brand new candidates, that you've never worked with before, just because some people are very good at kind of interviewing, but then, I think we've all been through this to some degree, probably at some point in our career. You bring on somebody and then it turns out, oh, they're actually not as great as maybe they seem during the interview process. So it's always great to just keep those relationships alive, check in on folk, even if you don't need anything from them, especially, if you had a lot of experiences together, because that is so important and has been so helpful for me personally in terms of building up a new team, not having to start completely from scratch. And then also I would say just like examine how you're interviewing. I know there's been a lot of changes for those brand new candidates, over the course of the pandemic in terms of how we operate an interview, right? We're seeing a lot of feedback from candidates and very qualified candidates too. So it's something that you want to really listen to and adapt your hiring strategies for, that they don't want to do like 8 or 9 different rounds of interviews anymore. It's exhausting. Like put yourself in the perspective of those candidates that have really been searching for that perfect role. Maybe they've been laid off from an organization. Maybe they're just looking for something, the next step in their career. But a lot of talented folk, they're saying enough's enough. We don't want to go through 9 rounds of interviews. We don't want to go through lengthy presentations and stuff like that. So really working with your people teams to understand, what is the threshold? What is an acceptable amount of parts of the interview process? Are you doing panel interviews when it's appropriate to kind of combine those conversations? Just to make that experience better for candidates, because it really is a crazy time right now, and things are changing. Yeah,
absolutely. We're definitely seeing it's a job seekers market. There's mass exodus of people leaving roles in which they weren't satisfied, and I think we're going to get into this a little bit later when we talk about millennials versus Gen Z and brand loyalty and affinity. So did you see any significant shifts in pandemic? I'd love it if there are any other kind of through lines you could kind of parse out for us. And then how do you walk the talk? You know, it's one thing to present as an organization with this incredible culture and, you know, unlimited PTO and all these different things. But when it comes down to it, you get someone inside the organization. How do you ensure that you and your company really embody what it is you're sharing externally to the public?
Yeah, I think those great benefits and kind of the company messages, those are great preliminary draws. But you know, we've really been seeing an influx of candidates that are more passionate about their direct managers because they've been burned so many times in the past by, you know, the great promise of an amazing organization. But then at the end of the day, you're not going to have a great experience and you're really not going to have a really good team without leaders that are empathetic. I think this is something that has been fascinating to watch too, just kind of a shift in empathetic leadership, just in general. That's kind of, you know, we're moving into this era of just being more, it's less about demanding work from our employees and understanding them as people and really shifting the mindset to be like, how can I help you grow just as you're helping the organization reach a place that it needs to be? So I think empathy has become more and more important, and then good leadership on top of just promoting your business. What are the core values? What are the perks? And then of course, like flexibility, working remote, right? Like we're seeing this massive upshift for people that they like the flexibility. They like not having to come into offices every day. Depending on where you live in relation to any office, that's a lot of hours. That could potentially be a lot of hours of your day that you could be spending, you know, more valuable places. And that doesn't always mean working. That means, you know, spending time with family, especially those of you with actual children and pets that you're raising. So we're seeing a lot of just, you know, to your point, it's a shift in the power of, you know, we have a lot of talented folk that are really raising their voices, making demands. And I think it's all for the best. I think, you know, this is benefiting everybody. And then it's also kind of creating a change in perception of, I think before the pandemic, there was a lot of emphasis on finding quality candidates that were near specific office locations. And then when we quickly went into, I was over at Electronic Arts at the time, when we went into the pandemic and I had to hire up quite a few members of the team, it almost became nice to broaden that out. We knew we were going to be working remotely for quite a while, maybe permanently. So not focusing on like, oh, just folk in this specific area. We can now broaden that out to include the larger United States and just focus on the quality of candidates. So yeah, so many things have changed and it's been quite a shift, but I think hopefully everybody's kind of getting to a place where they're starting to embrace it. And then your people practices internally are also keeping an eye on what candidates are wanting, what they're needing. Just general sentiment of your current employees is very important as well to retain that talent. But lots of things going on. So
absolutely. And I'd say, you know, in regards to a two-way conversation with employees, making sure that they're happy and connected, whether they be remote, in person, or hybrid, everything's obviously constantly in flux right now, given the nature of the world in which we live. How do you ingest that feedback and actually action on it? How do you take what people are saying, good, bad, and everything in between, and then integrate that into your daily practices of the business?
Yeah, first off, I'm going to start with some tips just because, like, I'm sure most organizations have some sort of cyclical survey that they send out to employees. But really, taking the time as people managers and talking to your teams about how to appropriately fill out these surveys. You know, without the right direction, sometimes folk will tend to go in and they'll give scores. That could be good scores or bad scores. But what's most important is usually a lot of these surveys have the written response area where you can supplement, like, why did you give that score? That is super important. And I cannot tell you how many times, like, without that sort of direction and going to teams and saying, hey, don't just fill out the survey from a scoring perspective, give us that feedback because we're not going to know what to do. We're not going to be able to pass along information if you just give something a bad score and don't put the context behind that. So I think formulating the right questions, working with your people teams to do that, and then making sure you have both company-wide surveys, but then team-specific surveys, because there's micro issues and there's macro issues that are part of a larger organization. So making sure you have the right surveys, and then making sure you're encouraging everybody to provide the right level of feedback to actually make that actionable and make change internally is super important.
I love that. And also celebrating the culture of giving feedback. I think it's such a critical business function that often can fall to the wayside, especially as we're busy trying to be productive, hit business goals, but maintaining the spirit of feedback within the context of the inner organization to have that two-way conversation and have people feel a part of is so important.
Yeah.
But I think you perfectly teed up our next talking point and segue, which is actually getting into more of the marketing data and analytics, because what marketer doesn't love a good survey? So I think that's a really fun place to shift, where we can start talking about, what are we seeing in the landscape today? How are we utilizing tools like survey data and all this information in the time of technology to really inform the ways in which we approach our consumers?
Yeah, we're seeing a massive shift there too, right? Like along with the pandemic, kind of establishing some different cadences and how we're interacting with consumers. There's also an extreme shift in data availability that's been ongoing for the past few years, right? So it's been kind of this slowly creeping in challenge for a lot of major organizations, especially marketing organizations, to figure out how to provide actionable insights with less data available, less user level data available. So really working with different tools and platforms that from a legacy perspective are now in a little bit of a tricky place because they were heavily cookie reliant and maybe don't have the best action plan to kind of help with measurement, attribution, optimization in like the new world order, and kind of adapting themselves to lean more into projected data sets, without that core hard set data or cookie availability is super important. I've always made it a practice whenever I'm entering into a new organization to kind of assess the tech stack, see where we are, take a look at all of the tools. Is there kind of tools that are duplicative in nature? Are these tools providing and these vendors providing great roadmaps that are talking about some of our core issues surrounding data availability? What's the plan? And then looking for vendors to be really proactive. So like we're not constantly having to go to them and being like, hey, we're a little nervous. What's going on with this thing that we got in the past that probably is going away? So I think it's super important to think about your tech stack, think about some of the major challenges today, and then just make sure you're holding your vendors and your partners accountable. Is super, super important. And then like internal education, like some teams don't know from a technical perspective what's happening. So trying to speak to marketers in a way that they understand, hey, what you were doing in the past, how you were measuring is changing. Here's what's going on. And then here's what we're doing to circumvent some of those challenges in partnership with some of our technology vendors and some of our just overall relationships is a great place to start.
I'd love to unpack that a bit more too and go deeper in what you were talking about, the key points and what you're seeing shifting today. So for anyone who may not know, what would you say the key trends you're seeing are, and how is it significantly changing so marketers can be cognizant of this moment?
Yeah, so there's still continued questioning, and I'm seeing a lot of organizations just struggling with attribution in general, because a lot of times there's still reliance on some vendors that maybe worked really well in the past that aren't working as well in today's day and age. Kind of to my earlier comment, like maybe not adapting in a way that is sustainable. So I think one thing to take a look at is really, is attribution feasible? Is it working in the way that you're running it today? I've never been shy of recommending, like when as an organizational leader, like you don't know specifically what the next steps or the answer is at the moment, look into consultancies, look into different resources externally that can really help you with that you can invite in and just kind of like sit down with them. There's no shame in that, right? Like not everybody knows the answers. So taking a look at that, talking to the right vendors, and then just kind of thinking about ways to shift your allocation, MMM is still very much viable. So I've seen a lot of brands that are just kind of like moving away from attribution in certain key shapes or forms, leaning more into MMM, testing more into incrementality. That's been kind of a huge thing for different brands to test if different channels or media spend allocation is working. So I think there's a shift away from maybe like all-inclusive one-stop shop measurement and analytics and attribution platforms in a larger spread to just key solutions, fragmented solutions that help with specific challenges that you're experiencing cross-channel due to the limited reliance on data we have these days.
The pressure of necessity. I love hearing that as a through line for what you were just saying. And one thing, it just with the organization I'm working, one of the core values is to urgently innovate. And I think that is such a beautiful thing to keep at the forefront of any type of marketing organization. In your experience and career working with, say, more traditional companies and brands versus more startup, maybe newer stage companies and brands, have you seen an embrace in one space versus the next? And how do you kind of coach and counsel organizations that may be a bit more dug in for lack of a better word, for being scared, because there's a lot changing. Traditional marketing tactics may not necessarily apply. And I think you touched on that briefly. So if you can unpack that even more, I think that'd be great.
Yeah, I've seen this more with larger organizations, just like global organizations that have like really legacy kind of embedded media organizations and things like that. This extreme pressure to like provide insights and to explain the value of different channels to the organization in ways that are not necessarily super possible anymore. So I think like fundamentally for business leaders, just because we're in an influx of the way that we're able to measure certain, let's say like mid-funnel channels are especially challenging, to not just write them off because you're not able to actually measure it against other parts of the business or other tactics that do have a little bit more information flowing in. And that's where something like incrementality can be really beneficial in kind of shifting the perception of how we gauge success for different experiments. Experimentation is also super important to test into new different like marketing partnerships or even media strategies, allocations of budgets, media types, so different types of creative testing into that. I think that's tremendously important. But I've seen that being a little bit more of a struggle for larger organizations. A lot of the smaller organizations just being able to be a little bit more agile and nimble. I think because you're evangelizing kind of differentiating methods of measurement and the new age of measurement and kind of some of these challenges, it's a little bit easier to disseminate that across different marketing channels and then like, working with your more technical data engineering teams and marketing analytics teams. So personally, I've experienced a little bit more of a challenge, in those bigger orgs than somebody that's in a little bit of more of a growth phase like Chime. So it's been a little bit of a nicer time here for sure.
Oh, I love it. I love it. And, I think upon approach, were there any specific blind spots you were able to recognize and then offer up, strategy around that you've seen a return on investment for when it comes to Chime or any of your past experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say this is kind of goes for everybody in general. There is often a large, I guess, like effort or consensus to try to bring in a lot of tooling or to build stuff internally to circumvent challenges without actually taking a step back and assessing the quality of your foundational data. So I think that is terrifically fascinating. I feel like we could dedicate a whole, hour-long session or more session to talking about data quality and how important it is to have the right folk managing and maintaining your data before you start onboarding all of these shiny new tools that are supposedly supposed to help circumvent some of these challenges. Because what you'll often find is you go through all the effort of doing the RFIs, assessing and finding the perfect vendor. You bring them in, and then you quickly realize if you haven't done that previous step and put those foundational fixes in place, oh, this doesn't really work unless we do all of this fixing of our backend data, or we're not getting the value we thought we would because our data is not in a place that works well with this specific platform. So that is huge. And I think, that's something that I learned very quickly over the years that is just tremendously important. Working with the right teams, understanding who your technical kind of owners of marketing data and just like foundational and core first party data across the organization, where that lives, set up regular time with them, get to learn how they're managing things, and then provide those recommendations and help them build up their team to better support your marketing org. Because those teams are not always experienced. They're experienced in working with data from a foundational perspective, core data to the organization, but marketing is often a completely different kind of ecosystem. So finding those right experts to manage that and working with them to onboard new technology is extremely important.
And I think onboarding is a really key piece too, because it's like, how do we unsilo these organizations and make sure the right hand's talking to the left? So there is that absolute utilization of the data, because there's so much information to be gleaned. But again, if everything's not operating at its full capacity, inevitably you're going to find a problem or a challenge.
Absolutely, yeah. Or the results in your long drawn MMM project or your MTA project that you're attempting to initiate, the results are going to be bad. And then, you're going to have to redo it or take a couple of steps back. Meanwhile, you've paid for a platform that can sometimes be millions of dollars, and then you're wasting a significant amount of spend just trying to figure things out along the way. So yeah, that goes back to the consultancies too. If you don't feel confident in what you're doing in an organization, go with a consultancy just for peace of mind and to make sure you're setting things up the best way possible, not only for the moment, but you want to build that foundational that supports foundational infrastructure that supports the business, like moving forward into the future, and then bringing back all these challenges we're having right now with data privacy regulation, availability of data, working within mobile environments where we're getting like, quite randomized and fragmented data sets available to showcase the value of certain marketing tactics. Pulling that all together and creating that unified strategy on how you're handling that today, and then how you're educating the larger organization about like what's going on and why we're not measuring the same way we were able to measure, let's say, like 5 or 10 years ago.
Absolutely. And I think what you speak to too comes back to really solid planning phases. There's so much that has to happen in advance of anything external. It's having the right time to plan and to coordinate and to integrate and then execute, which inevitably will yield a better result on the back end. So you're not scrambling and then seeing that waste of money, not usable data, and all the kind of problematic things on the other side that end up causing a lot of challenge and loss, time, money, efficacy. Now I'd love to shift into more of the fun things. We've talked about kind of the back end stuff, the internal components. I would love to talk about how we take this data and information and inform it in the ways in which we show up in the world on different technology platforms. So I know one of the things we were talking about in particular, with so many different options to be visible for an organization, let's get into the TikToks, and all the different platforms in which we're seeing people live, eat, and breathe, and how companies can be effective in being very mindful in how they choose to show up in those different spaces.
Sure.
Yeah.
Where to start with that?
I know it's so broad.
There's so much to talk about. I'll speak about it a little bit from what I've noticed over the years as these different platforms become more mature. It's been great to see somebody like a TikTok that there was a lot of hesitation when they first entered the scene, back when they were called Musical.ly, and then they kind of shifted over to the TikTok branding. A lot of marketers were skeptical about the use of that platform at first. They didn't understand it. It was just like weird, funny dances. Like, how does that kind of come back to our brand? How is that going to be effective? And then seeing that platform develop over the years and really kind of expanding both what kind of content was available on that platform, seeing the rise of micro content, seeing the sheer amount of downloads and audiences that it was pulling in, and then seeing their infrastructure evolve to support marketing organizations traditionally, just like how we work with Facebook, your Facebooks and your Googles of the world, from a measurement, from a first-party data use, like ingesting first-party data and targeting customers. So it's really great to see kind of where that is now, and then seeing how many brands are embracing kind of platforms like TikTok. I also did a talk on the metaverse a couple of weeks ago. So like even new and emerging kind of entertainment ecosystems like that, like understanding what that is, getting into it and understanding it before it becomes mainstream, right? You're going to definitely save a ton of dollars on CPMs and just overall costs if you're getting into the hot new emerging platform earlier than when everybody figures out like, oh, this is a great place for us to be and to spend our media dollars. But at the same time, you want to be cautious, right? You want to make sure that you're not pumping millions of dollars into something that maybe isn't clearly understood and how it's going to provide value to the business. So I would say always be curious, make sure you're getting into those new and emerging areas. And then just really, when it comes to your media mix, just like kind of taking a look at where you're seeing effectiveness for different demographics. Who are you trying to target? Where do you want to target them on? And then how are you adapting your content to fit that ecosystem? There have been a lot of, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, there have been a lot of moments where I've just been on social media, and you'll see when somebody takes something that was maybe meant for Instagram and they'll put it in an environment that was, they'll just kind of repurpose that ad and put it somewhere else. And it will say something like swipe up for more information, but on the app, the platform that they put that, that creative on, swiping up doesn't do anything. They just repurposed it and kind of quickly threw it into there. So really taking a look at, you could take the same foundational creative component, but how are you adapting that to where it's living? And then your custom audiences, which you're trying to target, I think is very.
Yes, 100%. And I mean, I'll speak to what you just spoke to. For me, and I'm judgmental, I'm just going to own it. When I see that on a platform that someone just repurposed without the mindfulness to make sure that it's fully fit for that individual platform, I'm almost, I don't want to say dismissive, but there's a moment where I'm just like, they don't care, and I think that's really important. As you go to be in each space, because there is no one size fits all. Everything is so bespoke and unique and different that there's a different conversation, a different approach, a different visual across this mix, And also, I think one thing that's important too when we work, not only with our own organizations, but other companies as well, is does it make sense to be here? And if so, what does that mean? Because I've seen a lot of people quickly try to adapt to have stake in these new and emerging platforms. However, they may not be the right fit, or their content strategy may need to be, slightly refreshed to have it feel relevant and meaningful. Because otherwise, you're just kind of consuming airtime for the sake of it. And I don't know that that drives value. So when you talk about, companies embracing their media mix and making sure that they're optimizing, because every dollar today counts, making sure that it's the best space for them to be that's going to elicit the response that they're really looking for.
Yeah. And I think TikTok is just to keep throwing that out there. Like, I love TikTok so much just from I feel like it got me through the pandemic. Micro content is awesome. And I love the sheer amount of different types of folk that create content on that platform. It's amazing. Where brands just are like, if as a user, if I notice something is an ad within the first like 1 or 2 seconds, you just scroll away from it and you go back to what you wanted, which was content. You wanted your funny content or your educational content, whatever you were looking for. So I think like definitely examining channels like that and developing something that's entertaining that I'm going to watch. I'm always surprised when I get through a complete TikTok video and then I look down and I'm like, oh, this is a sponsored ad. Like, I didn't even realize that because this just seemed like some form of content. Maybe there was an embedded product in that I didn't notice. Those are the ones that are just so amazing. And I think that's kind of a good example of how you adapt content for TikTok versus different, maybe social platforms that can be more direct to the point and like familiar from like an advertising perspective. That's really, really important.
Agreed. And I think content's king. And I love the idea of storytelling, creating really beautiful content that elicits a response via story. I've got a quick tangent. I was doing tons of research on, downtime opportunity. And there's this particular article from Ad Age, and it was talking about Square, which initially started off to support small business. And I had seen this, they almost created a movie about this movie theater closing down in Iowa. And it was all about the community bolstering around this movie theater. I hadn't the faintest idea it had anything to do with Square until the closing credits, but it was such a compelling piece of content. I probably watched it 7 years ago, and I still speak about it to this day. So I think that, what you're saying about the quality of the content and having it feel authentic and real and not overly salesy is so important, because people are smart, especially as younger consumers age into certain markets. They've been marketed to their entire lives, and they're so savvy. They can almost smell it in the water, if they're trying to be sold to, and then the opportunity is lost.
Yeah. Oh, and that's another thing too, just like the agility of specific brands to get onto meme trends, right? So I see a lot of brands embracing memes or jokes or kind of moments that are happening, whether it be in politics or whether it be in entertainment, like certain things that are happening in the moment. The lifespan of a lot of those things is very short. So understanding when the moment has gone, right, to avoid kind of submitting something or putting out content into the world that's already not relevant after maybe like a week or maybe even after like a few days. So making sure you have an established team that is really keeping their kind of the pulse of what's going on, and and just building out foundational infrastructure to release content extremely fast in certain areas when you don't necessarily have weeks or months to put something together to ride this wave in the moment, especially if it directly synergizes with your brand specifically. So there are some great examples of brands that are doing that in a day-to-day capacity. And when you have a brand that doesn't do that, they're kind of late to the party. They try to send out a joke that has already expired. Sometimes there's like a negative backlash from the community, and you'll get made fun of as a brand because you're not with it. You gotta be quick.
Yes, 100%. If you were to break it out in a percentage based on your experience, what percentage would you say is proper planning, and what percentage would you say is having the ability to be culturally responsive in the moment to really incorporate the type of content we're talking about? Because it is so fast, it is so quick, and inherently has to be responsive.
I think there's kind of automated workflows you can set up just to make sure that these things go fast. You still need the appropriate amount of approvals. Here's the challenge as well. When you're working that quickly to create a piece of content to catch on to a wave of something that's happening in the moment that you need to quickly respond to, there's also the added risk, and we've seen this as well, as kind of brands being culturally deaf, and it winds up backfiring because maybe they didn't understand the joke to its full nature and they just kind of released something and then it had more nefarious backgrounds, or they were commenting on something politically in the moment that just was very tone deaf or insensitive, and then you see major backlash from that. So I think having the right folk queued up and making sure that there is a team that is kind of built to do this rapid fire of content from a percentage perspective, I think it will change over the course of time. Initially, it should be way more focused on process and making sure that, this thing that you're building has all the appropriate touch points. And then over time, you want to figure out how to automate that. Key areas where things are getting caught up before you're able to publish, like how can you make those things faster? What people do you need to have in the room to make those decisions more quickly? And then when in doubt, I always thought this back to like ERG conversations, and then consultancies is another good way. Ask those internally if it's dealing with sensitive topics or issues that you don't feel confident releasing that content out. One, there's probably a reason. If you have this inkling that like, this doesn't quite sit right, get a second opinion, talk to your teams internally. If it is something specific to, the political climate or issues that are going on, talk to your ERGs internally, ask different people you're working with to like, take a look at this, give me any feedback. Or you can leverage consultancies to help you with that as well. Because that's also an area that's a little dangerous, right? You don't want to send out into the world that will come back to reflect negatively on the overall brand.
Yes. And I think even just coming out of Pride Month, Pride community is very important to both of us. Being able to bear witness to those that feel compelled to participate, regardless of the deeper history, the context, and the why, you can sense that, and again, for me, it's almost like a moment of pause where I'm like, whereas when I see people really mindfully engaging, having done the homework and having really planned in a meaningful way to elicit a dialogue, because ultimately we're people, right? We're playing on emotions. We're playing on an emotional response that elicits a reaction to then engage. How can we make sure that that's at the heart of what we're doing? Because we're real people with emotions and feelings dealing in a very intricate world that's now very social in nature digitally, which is wild. I know one of the things we wanted to talk about too is what we're seeing with these channels evolving. We'll get into Gen Z and millennials in just a bit, but I would love to hear from you what channels and platforms you're seeing evolve and maybe become less relevant and harder to measure.
Ooh, so sorry, you want to know what channels are more relevant, but then also which ones are
I mean, maybe the question's inextricably connected, because as we see millennials age, obviously baby boomers age, Gen Z is coming into the mix. Each has a different preference. I can say my experience with Gen Z folks and the need for that video content consumption, whether it be my niece, where I'm like trying to get her to cross the street without watching TikTok. But the ways in which they engage with social versus maybe my parents' generation that are very still, I've got a Facebook birthday message, let me check my event invite. It's just different, right? So I'd love to hear from you as you see, again, ages shift, people age, new age groups coming into the space of being the consumer with purchasing power. What platforms are you seeing either evolve and change and adapt? Are there any in particular you've seen feel less relevant? And what are your recommendations for the best places to be? And then I'd love to get more into the Gen Z versus millennial conversation.
Yeah, I think this is a fascinating topic of conversation because, I was having a conversation with some coworkers, I think it was the day before yesterday, and the notion of like banner ads came up and somebody jokingly was like, what's a banner ad? And I think about the way that I grew up, on the earlier days of the internet and how banner ads were always common. Maybe they were effective at a certain point, just those ads, even the mastheaders at the top, the side ads. But over time, kind of the way our brains evolved was just to ignore that stuff, right? So it's kind of like you browsing the web for years and years and years, and then it really takes something big to capture your attention on formats like that. So we saw kind of the uprise of video advertising. As we're consuming more video content, we're in a place where we're watching the content, and then maybe sometimes there'll be an ad in front of it, and then that kind of involved a little bit more in terms of brand deals within specific content that we're watching in the day-to-day. So it's not just an ad that's being thrown at us, the product is integrated into the actual content we're consuming. And then that goes back to like specific curated content for your different age groups. Where are you kind of promoting that? Where are you serving that content? How long is it? Attention spans definitely vary, from person to person and generation to generation. So, obviously going back to TikTok, big rise of TikTok, seeing a lot of content on there. Now with them allowing longer form content too, that's been interesting to see. So it's no longer, hey, you have to get your message through in 15 seconds. Now you have multiple minutes you want to create some sort of piece of content or story. Brand ambassadors are also really great to kind of throw in. One of the things I love about that as well, not to go off on too much of a tangent, is when there are the right brand ambassadors that brands are choosing to incorporate, their product into a piece of content that somebody is making. Maybe somebody that's an up-and-coming comedian and things like that, where they just like really integrate the product into their skit or their piece of content in a way that's super entertaining or makes you actually want to go out and buy something.
Yes.
So TikTok is huge. I think there are different ways to kind of get your audience members to go into different environments. So like Twitter is obviously great for a lot of meme culture, to comment back with other brands. I think millennials love that. Like what we're seeing with Wendy's, I think is really funny. Just like giving these mascots personalities. I think that is hilarious. And then just seeing these brands engage with one another in a way that sometimes is a little cheeky. They're throwing light punches at each other, things like that. They're commenting on each other's posts. That's awesome. And then Facebook is definitely still a place where there's more of a back and forth conversation happening, especially with some of the older generations that are still kind of consuming content on Facebook, and they're going there instead of, to talk about complaints. This is a great place to get feedback on specific products or messaging, right? Like folk that are going to write really detailed commentary, making sure that like if they're unhappy with a specific feature or a specific product in general, like you have a source to collect that and then build it into making a better product, take that feedback back, or address their issues, have them, report that to the team internally to make sure that all of their needs are getting met. So I'm trying to think if there's, going back to banner ads, maybe like a little bit of traditional programmatic. We're definitely seeing brands move away from, this historical banner-based ads and more into video content. So yeah, lots of shifts happening. Emerging platforms are coming out. And then I think one thing I'll touch on is just like going back to the whole metaverse conversation, because a lot of people are still very skeptical about that.
Yes.
It's right to be, right? Like, I think one thing to watch out for there is just understand it for now. I don't think anybody's going to go and say like, you should absolutely, have a deal in the sandbox and create a world for your product if it doesn't make sense. But know what's happening, because there will be a point where the barrier to entry into something like the metaverse or those sort of digital experiences becomes so much easier for folk to just jump into. Right now there's like a pretty big barrier of entry. You have to have the right kind of signups to different platforms. In certain cases with VR experiences, you have to have those headsets. So just keeping tabs on things like that and understanding when's a good moment to actually start considering it for your brand is extremely important.
And I love everything you said. I think as marketers, we're perpetual students. Coming in with that beginner's mindset and always staying curious is what we're seeing is so important. How would you say, embracing all this change versus perhaps a fear and resistance can impact your ability to properly market? Have you seen, do you have any examples to share in particular that could kind of highlight how truly embracing these new technologies wholeheartedly has really served to support future marketing outcomes?
Yeah, so on the tech side, you have more like media activation or more just like pure play ad and marketing?
I think it's wherever you want to take it. I'll keep it broad.
Well, something that's that I'll talk about that's actually been a really cool result of data privacy regulation and kind of the change in which we leverage our data and our partnerships with other organizations when leveraging data. Not to say this is being done at Chime, but just in general, other organizations I've worked with in the past. Things like data clean rooms. We have a lot of, or clean housing. We have a lot of companies, data-related marketing, analytics, attribution, audience segmentation platforms that are allowing more robust like data clean room integrations, or they're building them out themselves to allow different brands that I think historically, brands are always very, or should be very kind of safeguarded against sharing their first party data with other brands, right? Like, you don't want to give your branded data, you don't want to just hand over a file of all your customers, all of their attributes to another organization, whether they're competitors of yours or not. That's always like, you never know what people are going to do. But now with the rise of clean housing, because, and this was predominantly a factor of GDPR, we have kind of a lot of cool mechanisms that are being built where you can share your data with other organizations and for insights, for targeting, without actually releasing your first party data in its raw format to these organizations. So if you think about something like in electronic arts, they have a lot of brand, big partnerships with sports franchises and things like that. Those are great opportunities to think about how are you leveraging, let's say like the NFL's data in a way that's meaningful to sell the next Madden that's coming out or FIFA or whatever, whatever's coming out, without the paranoia of releasing your data directly to these providers. And then also like the amount of additional insights you're able to garner if you have second parties sharing their data with you in some of these secured environments. I think historically it was always a very it's a very high risk, high reward decision to say like, I'm going to try to share my data with this specific vendor, and then having to put a bunch of safeguards in place to make sure like they're not leveraging that for anything outside of what you agreed on when you're forming an agreement or a partnership with them. That's been really cool to see, and how it's broadening and opening up areas for more collaboration across different brands and garnering more, the sharing of data. I think that's been really cool to see.
Absolutely, because there's so many dots to be connected, and being able to have that approach, that mindset, I think it sets everyone up for success, because there's so many different ways we can integrate and partner. And I love the idea of us being able to come together in the spirit of that to utilize the information we have to market more effectively. So I think that was a really great thing to touch on. I think I would love to hear a little bit more about where you sit at Chime, specifically because you have a topic of conversation, finance, which historically may be more traditional in a sense, typically geared towards a older generation. Now, technology first, focused on more a millennial, younger audience. How has it been marrying those two things together? Because we're deeply involved when it comes to all things finance and personal lending at Quad. So I'm just so excited to talk about this particular intersection with you.
Yeah, I think product is key, right? Like making a product that is easily accessible, that is it has a low barrier of entry to come into with minimal risk to the consumer to try it out and see if they like something. That's been tremendously valuable from a Chime perspective, and just constantly taking feedback on how we can make the actual app, the offerings, the platform, the features and capabilities, taking consumer feedback and really understanding like what is best for our consumers. That's been really, really valuable. Like the feedback, we do a lot of surveying and stuff like that as well, where we're garnering that information back, and then listening on our social medias, right? Like kind of aggregating all of this feedback and this data together to continuously build a best-in-class product that supports our consumers first, and making sure that, people being able to access their money at any given time, and some of the things that like we allow to do the early paycheck receipts and things like that. It's really important to make sure that we have a quality product that supports our consumer firsthand. So I think that's been really important, and that's been such a nice thing to come into Chime and hear how great the product already was when I had joined, all of the great kind of innovative efforts coming down the pipeline. And then just that there's a lot of thought and consensus surrounding the consumer. Like it's not always about like what new feature can we enable right now that our biggest competitors are potentially doing, but more of like, is this quality for the actual consumers that are using this app? Will it benefit them? Is it adding value to their financial journey? And starting from a place there before just going wild and releasing all of these new features and capabilities. So that has been it's an ongoing journey, as it is for a lot of these like new and emerging fintech companies, but it's been especially rewarding here.
I love that. Like, speaking of value, I think that's so important, valuing people's time and creating the most seamless user experience top to bottom, so that it feels intuitive and it adds value to someone's life, versus the opposite, where if you have struggles with any type of technology, it's the opposite. It actually distracts. So I love what you guys are doing at Chime. And I also love when I saw all the different brand moments on your socials, because you're clearly so much more than just, technology when it comes to finance. There is a heart and soul that's been built around this company that's really compelling.
Educating our consumers is super important. So it's like kind of providing that value add of like, yes, we're promoting Chime as a product, but we're also giving you advice, general advice that isn't necessarily only applicable to you using this service, of how you can, eliminate credit card debt, how you can consolidate debt into like a single source that makes it easier to pay off. And then just all of these tips surrounding savings. And I think our social team does an amazing job at making that, funny and entertaining. It's not just like, here's
They
a
do.
like that you're going to fall asleep reading, like the gamification of a lot of this information, doing things like talking about account or debt consolidation as a burrito. I think stuff like that, these little moments are amazing. And I know when I enjoy content like this and I'm laughing at it, I'm like, all right, somebody's doing something right, because, this is not only educational, kind of talks to the brand and the overall vibe of Chime, but then also provides, a little moment of entertainment in the mix as well.
100%. I love the little Usher Giphy that I was seeing earlier today. I think it's perfect. And now I totally lost my train of thought because I was just loving that so much when I saw it. So just a curious question, because I know Gen Z was born in a recession. Millennials were born in a boom. Finances and their relationship to money is completely different than, the counterparts we're seeing coming up behind them when being born in a recession, having a lot more mindfulness around money. But I love the mission that Chime's created, and I love the vision that's shared really around creating financial wellness. Can you speak towards having that mission and vision driven organization that speaks to these younger audiences to really bring them into the fold?
Yeah, I think it's kind of creating that unity surrounding like, what are we trying to enable for you to make your financial success happen? And then just like providing that quality advice and guidance and being almost in a way responsible for our consumers that we take on. We don't want you to do things that are going to put you in a place where you're creating additional risk to your finances, but rather kind of creating a safe environment that you can build your credit score, you can save, you can create a significant savings and just overall make your financial journey go to a better place. So it's just like that, and adapting the content for different audiences and really listening to what their challenges and their perspectives are. It all goes back to that creation of content, right? And thinking about the consumer. So yeah.
I love it. I love it. And I want to be mindful of time because I know we're about at that moment, but I would love to just talk about the next big thing. Like, are there any things, like, I know how do brands get in on it, but are there any things you're kind of seeing on the horizon that would be really great for people to be mindful of?
Yeah, I would say I would say copying is what is the phrase, copying is the best form of flattery. Look at look at those brands. They can be competitor brands of yours, or they can be just what some of the larger, more successful brands in all of these spaces. See how they're interacting with new and emerging spaces, things like the metaverse, things with their use and their creation of content on TikTok. Anything else kind of up and coming, a lot of people are investing more in connected TV these days. It's been that way for the past few years, and then creating branded sponsorships with content creators, with major series, but then also smaller content creators. Just take a look around, see what everybody's doing, and then have those internal talks to see what your threshold for risk is. Dedicate budgets to testing that, like those budgets are going to be separate from your total media spend. They're kind of dedicated for the chance of failure. So that's okay as long as we're learning from it. Just always be testing. That's all I can say. So take a look around, have those conversations, test into it, see if it works, and then determine if it's we're not at the right time to test into this, or if it's something that's just not viable from your brand, and maybe re-explore it in a few years when things are always changing. TikTok may be a completely different platform in the next 5 years than what it is today. You never know. Yep. I think that's really important.
100%. And I love even what you said about embracing failure, right? Because we learn the most from those moments of failure to then inform the ways in which we go forward. And even in the midst of what we're seeing right now, because I know there's the lingering, conversation around potential recession. However, now is the time to embrace the data, the testing, all the digital technology to really make sure that you maintain that level of visibility and in the smartest way. So there is no lapse, no money wasted, and you can continue to improve regardless of the climate that we're in.
If your organization doesn't have comfort with failure, and especially like failure as a learning mechanism to make better decisions moving forward, you're never going to be able to take those risks that may actually lead to like really great rewards. So I think that's tremendously important as well.
100%, 100%. And on that note, I think that that is such a beautiful place to pause. And Jonathan, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been incredible.